session. Thank you. We also have English, French, and Spanish interpretation available for this session. So please feel free to select your preferred interpretation channel on your Zoom panel. Kindly mute your personal mic while someone else is speaking or presenting as well. And later on, we will have an open forum. So if you wish to speak on the mic, you may press the raise hand button in Zoom and kindly wait to be recognized. At any point in time, please also don't hesitate to submit any inputs, comments, and questions via our Zoom chat box. And for documentation purposes, we ask that you kindly rename yourself in the Zoom participant list using the format on screen. Thank you. And in the next slide, this is an communication session, it's perhaps a very opportune time to share that we are posting and resharing updates on the Stewards General Meeting sessions via the GIFT social media channels. So please follow us on Twitter at Fiscal Trans and on Facebook and Instagram via at Fiscal Transparency. We also encourage you to take screenshots of the sessions and post on your social media accounts. Tag us and use the hashtag 10 years of gift. Happy 10 years, everyone. And we'll definitely reshare your posts on our channels. So now, while we're also waiting for some other members of the network to join us, I'm going to launch a quick poll. Oops, or can I ask? I think I don't have access to the poll currently. I'm not sure why. If you can make me host, Albertina, uh, that would be great. Or if you can launch the poll on your end. Hello?
I made you host already. So you should be able to do it now.
Oops, I'm not sure why I don't have access to the poll right
so
now.
I can launch it. Just
okay, the poll number 1, please. Thank you. Can now stop the presentation, Aura. Thank you.
Jan just need to be host again. If you can.
Okay. Okay, sorry. Make host. There you go.
Okay.
I see we're around 37 now, 38. It should be a very dynamic session. We're designing this as an interactive session where everyone can also chime in and put their thoughts and inputs on strategic communication practices and tools for budget advocacy. So while we're waiting for the first Zoom poll to launch.
Sorry, Jan, the poll option is not working. So I think that probably we need to go on until this technical issue is solved.
All right, no problem at all. All right, so well, we can make the Zoom poll just through the Zoom chat box. Sorry for that technical glitch, but we hope you can still participate, as we hope inputs from you can feed into our rich discussion later. So again, good day, everyone. Welcome to Getting the Word Out and Making Waves, Strategic Communication Practices and Tools for Budget Advocacy in Advancing Fiscal Transparency. This is one of the learning sessions we organized to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of GIFT during this week's 2021 Stewards General Meeting. Now, GIFT's high-level principle number 4 recognizes the critical link between communicating effectively and implementing successful fiscal openness reforms. With the evolution of traditional media platforms over the years and the emergence of more and more social and digital channels in the past decade, now a wide range of options are available for us for free, to leverage for engaging people in budget advocacy efforts that we're doing. Communication is at the heart of the delicate cooperation between government, civil society groups in the private sector, and it provides great avenues for information exchange, and establishing consensus among different stakeholders with different opinions and interests. And it's a good strategy to build capacities of different stakeholders, contributing to the overall objectives of our fiscal policies and our budget advocacy projects. Um, I'd like to ask everyone, how often does your organization send budget advocacy communications to your audience? You can type it in the Zoom chat box. And do you have or do you subscribe or implement a communications plan? I'd love to hear from you on that. And because we say that communication is very important, and it's almost like a natural thing for us. It's part of the everyday work that we do, but sometimes we forget to take a step back and be more intentional. In many cases, it's often easier said than done, and sometimes the power and cross-cutting value of communications in the way we do our work in our field is sometimes overlooked or taken for granted by us as practitioners and by some of our institutions for a number of reasons, with internal and external challenges that we also face. Now, while fiscal transparency instruments are clear about the importance of effectively communicating objectives and results, they offer quite limited advice on how information on the outputs and outcomes of fiscal action should be communicated. Now, I see people answering in the chat box. Some do monthly newsletters, other advocacy materials. Thank you for sharing. And now, based also on the results of our community survey that we sent out to you last month, when we're still developing the agenda of the stewards general meeting, we also learned that members of the gift network are very interested to learn from each other about strategic communications. So today we're coming together in this session to tackle this specific topic. This is the topic that is most requested from the survey. Since there are quite limited references available out there. Oops. Okay, Paul is working now. I was informed. So can we launch our first poll so we can get more inputs from everyone? Great. Oops, the first question is, how often does your organization send fiscal transparency or budget advocacy communications like newsletters, campaign brochures, developed infographics to your audience? More than once a week, every 2 weeks, once a month, less than once a month. Okay. I'll give you a minute, and then later on, there's also a second question. So, how often does your organization subscribe or implement an organized and strategic communications plan for fiscal openness efforts that you are involved with? Okay. So, do we have results to share, Albertina? It's very interesting to know current practices of the participants in the session. Ooh, okay. Okay. So we see most of us here are implementing efforts about once a month. That's being intentional at least. And then some more than once a week, some more just less than once a month, and others only as needed. But let's further define later what is needed, and we can dive into discussions on those later. For a communications plan, we see that some of us rarely implement also very strategic communications plan. So I think later on we'll also explore how to be more intentional with our communications efforts, and that's why we also have a great panel with us today who will share this their experiences and recommendations on how to further enhance and improve our communication efforts. In the gift coordination team, this is also something that we are still learning and want to enhance as part of our workflow and processes. So we're very excited to learn about successful but also failed attempts of communications campaigns, challenges, best practices, more so practical tools that we can use in the promotion of fiscal policy objectives and results. This session is designed to be a dynamic and interactive session. We'll be hearing from experts from Fabrizio Scrolini of the Latin American Initiative for Data, or ILDA. We also have Undersecretary Christian Ablan from the Freedom of Information team of the Presidential Communications Operations Office in the Philippines. We also have Ms. Lorena Caballero of the Ministry of Finance and Public Credit in Mexico. We have Mr. George Newman, Head of Communications of the Open Contracting Partnership. But as you have already been participating and noticing, we'll be actively soliciting inputs from you also, our participants, on your specific experiences related to our topic. So this should be an interesting discussion. So speaking of Zoom poll, I think it's time to launch our poll number 2. Let us now launch a new question before introducing our first speaker. I'll give you a minute to submit your answers. Can we launch poll number 2? Okay. So earlier we asked you, how often do you communicate to your audience? But now we ask, how well does your audience engage with your communication efforts? Okay. So if we have the results, can we share it already?
So we don't have votes yet. Just give them a couple of minutes, a couple of seconds. Okay.
Okay. Let's share it. Interesting to see what you answered. Oh, I don't think.
Yeah, we don't have answers yet. We can.
I think the poll launched incorrectly, because when you submit your answer,
Okay.
it gives you back a message that it's not submitted.
Okay.
Okay, can try relaunching it again. It's
Yeah,
hard
sure.
to facilitate online things like this, but we're trying.
And today the polls thing is not being our friend.
It's not being our friend at
I
all.
know, yeah. But anyway, let's share it when we're ready. But okay, it's back. Let me just key in my answer.
Yeah, now
Okay.
it's working.
Now it's working. Let's give you a few more seconds to answer for everyone. And if you have enough results, Albertina, please share away.
Okay. So now I'm sharing the results.
Oh, very interesting result. So 10% says that their audience extremely engages with them extremely well, some somewhat well, and then not very well. For others poorly, and sometimes for some people, sometimes they wonder if anyone is actually out there. So it's very interesting. As we can see, we may often send and regularly send communications to our target audience and stakeholders, and we may even have a comprehensive communication plan laid out. But sometimes we can still end up with weak engagement with the people we want to talk to, and we wonder if people are actually out there listening to us. Like, hello, we're doing something. Are you listening? This is what we call the advocacy gap, which is a big challenge that we all face in our field of work, whether we are government reformers or civil society advocates or part of international development institutions. So, specifically, our first speaker will talk about this and the challenges in generating demand and motivations for citizens to engage in the fiscal openness advocacy. We're pleased to have in our panel someone who has worked for many years with governments, regulators, and civil society at the international and regional level on transparency, access to public information, open data projects, and public sector reforms. So, he has perhaps a lot of experience and face similar challenges and can add better frame to our discussion today. So without further ado, I'm very glad to welcome and now pass the virtual floor to Fabrizio Scrillini, the Executive Director of the Latin American Initiative for Open Data. To you, Fabrizio. Welcome.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And I'm very pleased to join you today. This is a very impressive event with people coming from all over the world. So first of all, congratulations on pulling this one out in these times. So that goes for the organizing team. And I'm very pleased as well to see friends and colleagues in this audience. I'm joined here as well by my colleague Silvana Fumega, who is our director of research. So I think that's, I mean, I was one of the ones that submit in this poll the answer were, we wonder if there's someone out there, right? So the reason for this is, that, I mean, through the years, ILDA, which basically explores the use of data for development in this region, we are a research organization, but very close to policymakers and practitioners, trying to understand the use of data and trying to promote the use of data for accountability. Sometimes is one of the, this area is one of the most challenging and yet most important areas where the use of data could make a significant difference. And this goes long, when GIF was actually being born, ILDA was also sort of being born a bit later as a research project, now a research organization. And in this journey, I think that the first thing we noticed was essentially one of the first challenges we noticed through our research was the difficulty to engage the right audience for this kind of data. So first, I mean, we all come from a framework. I assume we all come from a framework where transparency matters. This is what should be done. This is, part of our DNA as democracies. And surely as democracies also, if you want, as good governments, and they should behave in this way, right? I mean, accounts should be public, expenditure should be public, and so on. But that's not the case. And the first, so we ran this experiment, which is still going on in São Paulo, led by Gisele Craveiro, called Cuidando do Meu Barrio, or Taking Care of My Neighborhood. That's history at the moment. But what's initially fascinating is that Gisele managed to publish all this data from local authorities in Sao Paulo, connecting with public expenditure in the neighborhood. And there are two great elements here. The fact that, this is expenditure that matters to people. It's essentially where the money is being spent near to you. And B, it's very difficult to extract this data because, local authorities often do not have the same resources that national governments could have. Now, unfortunately for us, or fortunately for us, we learned that people, while this effort was very important in terms of transparency, that didn't lead to much use. It was in a second phase where Gisele and her team managed to target basically specific constituencies in these neighborhoods where actually the platform got used, and it's actually the way it's currently sustained. It's because these particular people able to understand and pinpoint some of the data points which effectively are expenditure. Yes, Gisele is over here as well. so that's great, and she's sharing the link with you on the chat. And so this experience which keeps going on, I think is one of the ways in which we also challenge the assumptions that we have about transparency. The fact that it's not about just putting data out there. It's more about engaging a particular audience and then dealing with the second part, which is the political incentives that people might have or not to use the data and the environment in which they are essentially operating. I think that, by now it's a common trend, unfortunately, that somehow what people call the civic space, or let's assume that, in older and less fashionable terms, freedom of expressions and freedom of assembly and the ability of communicate and organize is shrinking to some degree, right? So essentially, sometimes where you are actually pointing out some sort of account expenditure that is not clear, basically, could not be something related to a specifically corruption, but essentially there are risks for people doing so. So that's a second element I would like to bring, that in the last 10 years, essentially the environment also changed, and it's important to keep that in mind. The third element I would like to bring also comes from our experience with a colleague of mine, Manuel Adiestaran. It's an Argentinian, and as part of our research, which hopefully we will publish very soon, this is something that is still in the wraps. But through his research, Manuel tried to analyze the expenditure tools that governments had and the data the governments produce. Manuel was kind of now is a practitioner, but was also a researcher, and originally was a bit of one of the early pioneers in the use of budget data. And Manuel got really fed up with the government not publishing this data, so he just decided to collect this data from the government webs and create a better platform. In the process, exposing a bit of government blunders here and there about the way they expose, they actually spend money, and some uncomfortable facts about who were they giving money to, right? So that was interesting, as a sort of civic action in the early days of let's say hacktivism, to the idea that through your computer you could use and you could do something about the status of public accounts. Now, the story is interesting because through Manuel actions, and a bit later down the track, the government in question, which is the government of Bahia Blanca, improved a lot the way they produce data about contracts, and they produce data about public expenditure. So that's a good news. The way to get there, it's a bit more messy. And so Manuel decided to run research about the infrastructure that governments had in Argentina to support this publication of data. And the news are not very good. I mean, like, essentially, outdated operating systems are unable to provide the level of detail, not only for the people to know, but crucially for government analysts to know what the hell is going on in their own governments. And that's part of what we found fascinating about the research, the fact that openness and the fact that data quality was not only about, helping the citizens to take control, if you want, or take oversight of their public finances, but also to their own government, right? And so that's another way in which I say that part of the audience that this community had, and maybe was not explicitly engaged from the beginning, was ministries of finance, auditors, and others that will essentially welcome this effort to standardize data and to create better tools to visualize and use them. Now, in these days, I mean, the industry have moved forward much with brutal force in terms of developing tools. So the challenge is not about the tools available, but more about how to engage users with such tools. And I think that's where more research is needed. I'm very glad to see Giselle is joining you tomorrow to speak about that. So the other element I would like to bring, and with this probably I will try to keep it short, is two pieces of research we have been doing. A is the continuation of a project that the Web Foundation started early on, which is the global data, the open data barometer. And we have a regional data barometer that we produce here for Latin America and the Caribbean, just to share with our colleagues. And I will type the link here so you can go there. And the picture there is maybe I think I can do this from here. Let me see if I can or if not. Yes, I think I can. I can share with you let's see if you're getting to see that. So this is the website of the barometer. And so basically the barometer measures the way a country is ready for openness, the implementation of open data policies, and essentially the impact of such policies. Now, this is the Spanish version. We have an English one here as well, which hopefully we'll be able to see very soon. And so the idea of the barometer was to measure openness in Latin America in terms of open data policies in these 3 dimensions. And obviously it's not going to load. Oh, yes, it is. So what you get to see there, it's part of the good news is that over the last, let's say 3 years, Latin America improved the way it published data. Most of the countries did, with the exception of Mexico, and so, which is I think the only country that actually went a bit down in the measurements, as you get to see here. And the areas where the improvement is most noticeable, is actually public expenditure and open and contracts, right? That these areas improve basically, and I think that's part of a collective effort where GIFT, open contracting partnerships, the Organization of American States and others are being essentially continuously pushing forward for this. And I think there's an element to say that this has been achieved. Now that's for the good part, but for the not so good part, I mean, the barometer has a scale of 0 to 100, and our regional leaders at the moment, which are Uruguay and Argentina, have 64 and 63. So there's massive room for improvement, and that's something that one of the areas where the barometer shows that, I mean, we can improve a lot is in terms of impact, right? In terms of social impact, in terms of economic impact as well. And so that's just for you to know. I am unsure about the situation in other parts of the world. This is the evidence we have. And this is the other thing I would like to say for people demanding evidence or demanding reform in these areas. It's always not, I mean, we live in a world where evidence might be a bit, let's say, not used by our leaders these days. So they don't like evidence. But to some degree, because we do play a role in advocating for reforms, it's always good to have an evidence-based approach to this, so people get to know, and particularly the audiences we need to reach, which in this case most of the times are either auditors, ministers of finance, all these people that usually works in the machinery of government. That we are not just making noise just for the fun of it. It's because we do have the data to prove that there's much to be done in terms to improve the situation. So it's a rational demand here. It's not just we feel like there's not enough transparency. It's like, no, we do have the data to prove this, right? And so that leads us to the second challenge at the moment, which I think is part of the void that has been created by the lack of an instrument that helps us to measure globally. This, I mean, there's obviously the international partnership measurements, but from the data side, what we have been trying to do is, the global data barometer. And as Aura mentions, GIFT is one of the thematic partners for this. And I would like to I don't know if this is technically possible, but I would like to my colleague Silvana Fumega to just briefly sum up what are we going to be measured there to finish this presentation.
Sure. Go ahead, Silvana. Welcome to the session.
Yeah, that wasn't in the plan, but just because Fabricio mentioned the GDP, I'm just briefly going to say that, yeah, we are in the middle of the implementation of the new global data barometer based on what Fabricio showed there, that it was the last edition of the ODB in 2020 in Latin America and the Caribbean. We are now working with a global structure. We are measuring different things based on that previous exercise. And also, I mean, we have a a group of thematic partners. Here, GIFT is part of that, OCP as well, and we have other thematic partners as OGP, TI, and so on. And we have a network of regional hubs as well. But one thing that I want to mention in terms of the communication and the products, more than the methodology itself that you can check in the Global Data Barometer website, I'd like to mention that one thing that we are discussing these days with the core team there at the GDB is that we need to be sure that whatever we are publishing at the end of this exercise, that is going to be a report, the data, visualizations, and so on, should be, for us, the end product. That's clear. But for the rest of the people outside interested in different topics, should be the input, the beginning of different products that could be done following probably next year and the following month. So we want to be clear to engage with our partners, thematic partners, as well as regional partners and any other people that are interested in this data to start producing other products where the data that we are collecting these days is only the input to produce many other products in terms of communications, policy, and different initiatives. So that's something that we want to be clear about how, and communicate with different partners, regional or thematic, to be clear that we are providing the best input that we can for them to build different products or different research with the expertise that each of them could provide to that data.
And that's it.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you, Fabrizio. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And just to sum up, like the three learnings we have from here: A, do understand who is your audience, and B, there is an issue with infrastructure and the way data is published, and C, keep hope because at some stage, evidence-based policy making is going to be fashionable again. So keep hope for that.
Thank you so much. A very insightful first set of presentations and information that has been shared by Ilda. Thank you, Fabrizio. Thank you, Silvana. What struck me from your sharing is that, it's not just about putting data out there. It's about actually engaging the right people and packaging data or information in the right format that encourages and motivates people into action. So there is that big challenge that faces us. Among others, you mentioned about infrastructure, about availability of tools, but more so how to move people into action. I think the next presenters would shed more light on how they were able to move people into action. So, and but before we move on to the next presentation, I'd like to launch another poll. So if we can ask your help, Albertina, again, to launch poll number 3. We talked about earlier about infrastructures, about tools. Now let's talk about offline strategies first. The next poll talks about what are the offline tools or platforms that your organization is using in your fiscal transparency and or budget communication. So if we can launch that poll and allow people to submit their answers, let's just a quick check-in on everyone.
It's ready, Jan. Wish me luck.
All right, let's launch it. If not, you can also just type it in your Zoom chat box. We have like radio, television, in-person events, what have you. How do you communicate offline? Don't off the computer. How do you reach your target audience? Do you print materials? Is that still a thing? Do we still print on paper? Or everyone is just now on digital channels? Are we all just online these days? It would be interesting to check and see what the network is doing offline. Is it?
Guys, yeah, I will end the poll because we have several answers yet. So
Okay.
Let's see.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So we see that a lot of us are still doing in-person conferences. Despite the pandemic, we think in-person events is still the most effective. Offline, We also still do printed media. It's still a thing. Great to know. And people do radio and television. Others, please submit on your Zoom chat box. Nobody uses text messaging anymore. Everyone is on WhatsApp now. We can reach everyone. Okay, we have also other updates from the chat. From George, they're doing for US outreach, they develop a news resources, a little booklet that they're mailing. Oh wow, mailing to different partners and hand over in person. That's very interesting. So we have very interesting outcomes from the results of the poll. Looks like the members of the gift network has leveraged and has been leveraging on a number of offline tools and platforms out there. I wonder which of these tools our next speaker has also used in their own campaigns in the Philippines. I'd also like to hear, later on maybe how the challenges raised by Fabrizio and Silvana are being addressed by country presenters. So to help answer this question, let me call on now our next speaker. We're very honored to be joined by Undersecretary Christiana Blan from the Presidential Communications Operations Office, all the way from the Philippines. I know it's very late over there. It's 10:30 in the evening. So thank you to the PCOO team for being here. It's very late at night there. Undersecretary Ablan leads the Freedom of Information Office in the Philippines and works closely with the Department of Budget and Management on various communication projects. So he's here to join our open forum, but I also believe that he has recorded a video to ensure that he sticks to our time limit. So Yusik Chris and team, please project now on screen the video. Welcome and please take the floor.
Good day, everyone. It is an honor and privilege to have been invited by the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency, or GIF, to represent my country, the Philippines, as I share our experience in conducting several outreach activities through the use of innovative platforms to communicate and advocate for budgeting and fiscal transparency. I would like to send my warmest regards to GIFT's Network Director, Juan Pablo Guerrero, and its Outreach Coordinator, my colleague back here in the Philippines back then, Ms. Marian Fabian, for inviting us to the Stewards General Meeting of GIFT. I'd also like to greet a happy anniversary to the GIFT for celebrating 10 years. My name is Christian Ablan. I am an Undersecretary at the Presidential Communications Operations Office, or PCOO, in my country, the Philippines. It is a mouthful, but all told, it is equivalent to a ministry or Department of Public Information. As an Undersecretary, I handle administration and finance. And I also concurrently hold the item of being a program director of our Freedom of Information Project Management Office. And so today, I wear two hats. One as a finance and accounting undersecretary and one as a transparency advocate. Before we proceed, a few updates from my country insofar as transparency is concerned. In 2019, the Open Budget Survey of the International Budget Partnership placed the Philippines in #1 position for Southeast Asia for budget transparency and secured a 10th place ranking worldwide. The following year, in 2020, the same organization awarded the Philippines, along with 3 other countries, the COVID-19 Global Scorecard on Accountability. The scope of the coverage assessed 120 countries from March to September of last year. Our country was measured on transparency measures and the extent of public engagement on oversight powers over fiscal measures. All right, at this point, we will be showing you some slides on how various initiatives of the Philippine government in championing transparency in the context, of course, of fiscal processes. First up would be a project together with our partner department, the Department of Budget and Management, called Project DIME, short for Project Digital Imaging for Monitoring and Evaluation. It is a web-based application that monitors selected high-value government projects by comparing fund utilization vis-a-vis physical accomplishment through geomaps. Next, we have our partner agency, the Department of Interior and Local Governments, DevLive, short for Development Live. This is a mobile application very similar to Project Dime, wherein the public is able to monitor and view government infrastructure projects, specifically small infrastructure projects. The next slide shows you two other portals. The first portal is the Government Procurement Policy Board, or GPPB online portal, which launched to communicate procurement projects undertaken amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. The next one is the Philippine Humanitarian Assistance Registry, or FAR, that communicates public information on local and foreign humanitarian assistance. The next slide is from another partner agency, the Department of Information and Communication Technology, or the DICT. They oversee Open Data Philippines. This is an online repository of open datasets in a machine-readable, reusable, and understandable format. The next slide is my program. It is the Freedom of Information Program, particularly our eFOI portal, a website that you can visit on foi.gov.ph. It is another mechanism where citizens can access public information from government. The next slide is the Philippine Transparency Seal. Under a national budget circular of the Department of Budget and Management, it reiterates compliance to the law, which says that every government agency, to enhance transparency and enforce accountability, shall maintain a transparency seal on their official websites. This seal or tab should contain the agency's mandates and functions, names of officials, and contact information, as well as budget and financial documents. Our President, President Rodrigo Roa Duterte, weekly addresses together with cabinet officials, including our Finance Secretary and Budget Secretaries, provides updates on the status of COVID-19 response and recovery interventions of our government. My agency, PCOO, also organized webinar series called In Focus, capturing transparency in budgeting and procurement process in the time of COVID-19. The webinar series consisted of 4 episodes featuring different topics such as the critical role of civil society organizations in safeguarding transparency and accountability in budgeting and procurement, COVID-19 and its impact in the procurement process, procurement best practices at the local level, and on keeping the receipts, fiscal transparency and accountability initiatives in response to COVID-19. My agency, PCOO, together with other government agencies, organized the Regional Pre-SONA series, which is a face-to-face road show. It's an in-person activity wherein government goes down to the grassroots and we are able to inform the citizens about comprehensive program of government to fight COVID-19, what is our vaccination program, and other achievements and programs of government. National government also organized online roadshows, and this is called the GIAO 2020, Open Government Virtual Town Hall Meetings, wherein several topics were discussed by government, including sessions on education, employment, and stimulus packages. This enabled more than 200,000 participants to have an open and protected space to raise their questions and concerns on key national and local programs, issues, and plans amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition, we still have the Citizen Participatory Audit, or CPA. This is a strategy to uphold the people's right to a transparent government and the use of public resources built on the promise that public accountability prospers with a vigilant and involved citizenry. Through the performance audits conducted together with civil society, the program helps in determining whether the public funds are efficiently allocated and properly expended. We also have the COVID-19 Citizens Budget Tracker. This is a project together with our civil society organization partners, NGOs, and other volunteers. It consists of a community of auditors, artists, lawyers, social workers, researchers, coders, and regular citizens who work with government and non-government sector in holding power to account. Through this budget tracker, they aim to consolidate financial reports from different government agencies in open data format to properly monitor the flow of cash and allocations in response to the COVID pandemic. Those, ladies and gentlemen, consist the transparency toolkit of our country. We have freedom of information, or FOI. We have open data. We have Project Dime. We have DevLive. We have GPBB portal and other activities. As much as we are proud of our fiscal transparency programs and initiatives, we are also eager to learn from you. Thank you so much, and good day to everyone. And thank you so much to Gift again.
Thank you very much, Yusik Chris. By the way, I see there's a lot of action in the chat box. So for others who might also have questions for Fabrizio, Silvana, Yusik Chris, please feel free to type them in, get the conversation going on the side in the chat box, and we can better discuss them later during our open forum. You know, earlier Fabrizio and Silvana brought up prospects of us coming together and perhaps aligning and strengthening our communication efforts. I think that's a great idea, Zuki. I see in the chat box, and George are having a conversation on measuring success of our communications efforts. I'm sure we'll have a very dynamic open session later. But for now, I think it's time for another Zoom poll. Are you ready, Albertina? So earlier we talked about tools. In his presentation, Yusek Chris has shared various offline tools or strategies that they have been implementing, but they also mentioned online tools. So let's now go digital and social, I believe.
Sorry, Jan, the poll is not working again. So let
I
me
see.
just.
Okay, it's fine. The next poll is just about exploring the online tools and platforms that your organization is using in your efforts. So if you can type it in the chat box, and then later on we'll launch the Zoom poll if it's available. But if not, we'd love to hear from you. We have social media channels, we have websites, we have online messaging platforms, do you have WhatsApp groups? Please do share it in the chat box, and we'd be happy to take note of it. Okay, I see people sharing on the chat. We see earlier in the first, I think a second poll, we had in the options an SMS as a way. Text messaging is expensive, so Fabrizio says there is some experience with a software called Rapid Pro. Okay, we're learning a lot about new platforms here to use, and then they have also monthly newsletters. Very, very good to know. So keep sharing, everyone. So okay, looks like the gift community is very active online as well. It's also an opportune time for you to promote your social media channels. If you're all using them, please go ahead and share it in our Zoom chat box, and let's follow each other. And on this note, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who will be talking about how they were able to leverage on this particular digital tools for their user engagement efforts in promoting fiscal transparency, public participation in Mexico. So let's also find out if they have used many of these platforms and more. And so I'm very pleased to introduce, thank you for accepting our invitation, Lorena Caballero, who leads the Directorate of the Budget Transparency and Capacity Development of the Ministry of Finance and Public Credit in Mexico. To you, Lorena. Welcome.
Thanks. I'm going to share my screen.
Please go ahead.
I think it's a problem. I'm not able to share.
Maybe we can make you co-host. That would help. Or we can help you share your screen if it's uploaded online. We can.
I think.
Okay, great.
Okay, I'm going to speak in Spanish, but first of all, I want to say thanks to all the GIFT members to invite us to share our experience from Mexico about transparencia presupuestaria. Primero me gustaría hacer una
First of all,
referencia
I would like to make a brief reference to the previous presentations, that of Fabrizio. In the first place, Mexico has had a couple of obstacles in the last 2-3 years that have seen reflected in some setbacks. We were leaders in the region on this matter. And well, it is important to mention that, as you were saying in the report of the Regional Barometer on Data, one of the pillars that sustains transparency in Mexico is tax transparency, which is done from the Secretary of Public Credit. And I am talking about this because I think that this report presented by Fabrizio is a very good tool in order to, at least at the interior of the Finance Ministry of Mexico, to keep on working in our areas of expertise, not only for publishing data in these efforts for tax transparency, but also in the generation of tools for citizens to see a use in this data. Said this, from the Mexican perspective, as I already mentioned in previous meetings, Mexico has already walked a long way with the use and with the support of very highly trained staff towards fake tax transparency, and we hold the fourth place internationally when we talk about budgetary transparency. And we would like to think that at the government we have done everything that's necessary, but that is where we have to look at what we think as the government and what the society thinks of us as the government. And this generalized perspective that where the citizens puts the government as into a box as a one unity puts us in a situation that makes us look like we haven't done any progress at all, even if we have the highest ratings internationally. And in our experience, it is important to understand why this is happening, why we haven't been able to communicate the information we have and how we should be trying to use it. Our interaction with the citizenship could be defined in these 4 points. The first point is that due to the nature of the information we publish, there will always be a very important technical component. And this, in the first place, makes it not very attractive for those who are not very familiar with the topic. What do I mean when being familiar with the topic? People who do not know how important public expenditure and taxing is for the day-to-day activities of the country. And the second point is something that happens across the Latin American region, and that is the heterogeneous capacity among the population. We have a very highly trained group of the population that consumes our information and demands for more tools. We also have an audience that does not have the technical capacity, even if they have, to put it this way, the need or the desire to access to information and use it for their own benefit, or to achieve rights to access resources to fulfill their needs. And it may look that for this group of the population, of this of the general public, our information is not relevant or they cannot use it. And this is why they consider our information to be outdated, because the fact of not knowing the processes for budgeting makes people think that there is something not unclear or non-transparent. For instance, we end the fiscal year and we publish everything all the way to April next year, the following year. That's at least for the case of Mexico. So that makes things look not so transparent to the general public. And this is something we are considering, we're taking into account. And well, this is where the hardest work for tax transparency starts. Transforming data takes a process, and this is a process of adapting the public servants for them to be increasingly aware of the importance of generating data that are timely and useful. And maybe all of my colleagues will support the idea that communicating information is only 10% of what it means to truly make information transparent. Trying to find a way to translate these databases, this information into tools that the citizens can consume and use is a hard process. It is important to make sure that this is a product they can turn to, and that's the most important process, because this is not only about developing digitally tools or making them accessible, but also it is about acknowledging that whether this tool will be useful to the citizens who are not quite aware why this information is useful to them or how they could use the information you're publishing. So this is where we have to make an emphasis or put an emphasis in developing tools for people we want to have information available. And here, I think it is very important to take into account that when we're talking about information consumers, of course, we're talking about citizens, but also, as I was saying, that this is a heterogeneous level of capacities. We also have that those different levels of capacity in the public service. We could also find public servants who should know information for carrying out their activities, but they do not have the capacity. So it is important to use or generate tools focusing on whether the information is going to be directed to decision makers, for facilitating their learning curves, for making decisions, or am I going to direct this information to a public? And do I want the public to find some sort of empowerment through this information and to become more active as citizens? And this is where collaboration with sectors that are not necessarily governmental is fundamental. From the experience of Mexico, for us, it has been vital to have this external perspective of, for instance, organizations that are experts in different topics, or citizens who are expert in different topics, for them to provide their input and bring a new perspective additional to the one of the government, in order to have a broader scope and a broader vision. And also, if we want this information to be consumed by public servants, well, we have to think of their profile and the different scenarios where they could be using that information for this resource to be available to them. So what is the next greatest goal in this process? That is, in the development of resources and tools for data use. Well, the tools should be simple enough, but also concise enough for you to have in one single tool an understanding of the different interaction, the different phases, and the different moments of the tax cycle, the different goals, results, objectives, and also the process of taxing, the follow-up of public expenditure. And I think that is one of the greatest challenges, to try to make all these points converge in one single tool that is reliable. The fact of having the information on processes that the Ministry of Finance can carry out, which are not simple processes, even for public servants. It is these processes may be even too complex to some of the public servants, let alone to the citizens at large. So the fact of having one tool where all these things, all these factors can be monitored, that is the public service, budgeting, higher all the public expenditures and so on can be monitored, is wonderful. In Mexico, we made great progress in the development of such tools. We were working on simple and also on complex tools. So on the slide, you can see the perfect summary of how all these government processes can be summarized in one tool, in one search engine. But this takes time. This is an exercise that is iterative and that becomes increasingly complex. What I was saying at the beginning, we also have to consider the appropriation by public servants and also raising awareness among them on the fact that the information they are providing will be useful, will be consumed, and will nourish a series of citizen tools. In the case of Mexico, one of the first tools we had for translating data into consultation tools for decision makers was on the public sector. Public works have always been an issue of interest in Latin America, and also there has been a high level of opacity, of a level of secrecy in the use of resources, and this was one of the areas where transparency was first addressed. That is, to provide certainty to the citizens about the resources used, who is using that money, and that was the first moment when we started talking about transparency on any type of public work carried out across the Mexican territory. And that was, well, that is a first example that leads us to one of our last platforms, which in particular follows up on the goals of this administration, which goes from 2019 to 2024. And there are some particularities, some significant characteristics. This administration, at the beginning of their strategic planning, had great difficulty in order to establish these indicators and goals that could provide reliable information on the achievement of all these great goals that were established at the beginning of the administration. And one of the first challenges we saw when trying to translate this national development plan, which did not have indicators or any kind of metrics that we normally work with when doing strategic planning, faced us with the challenge to generate a tool that could actually provide the citizens a measurement of the goals achieved, baselines, parameters, and also where they could consult the progress made in terms of the goals established. We saw great intentions, beautiful intentions, but these were not easily measured. Fortunately, we worked very fast in the construction of this platform. And I think that this is going to turn into a very commonly used platform for having a contrast of the different between the narrative of the administration and the actual figures of what has been done and how they have performed as regards the objectives established.
Hello, sorry to interrupt, Lorena. Sorry, we're running out a bit of time, so if we can wrap it up in a minute, that would be great. Thank you.
As you can see, this is work that has been ongoing for a long time, where we have created these platforms for different consumers. We have platforms that are fully designed for citizens to consult the types of government support available to them. And this is thought or addressed to people who can just perform a search without having a kind of experience doing that. And on the other hand, we have on the screen some tools that are rather addressed to public servants for them to have an idea of how they are achieving their goals and how they are administrating public resources. This is for subnational governments, and we also have information that is now under the Finance Ministry, and these are geared to communicating the information. We have also made use of long distance or online courses. We have 3 online courses. At least 80,000 people have graduated from these workshops. So we use many of the tools that were mentioned at the beginning of the surveys, of the polls, both face-to-face and also online. We have also generated great deal of materials regarding public finance, and of course in social media through YouTube. We have also found a way to share and communicate what we have been doing and how things can be talked about and how people can communicate with us, because much of the interaction we have with the public are questions, doubts they have. So, well, that would be it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for that very comprehensive and informative presentation, Lorena. We take note of so many digital tools that you have highlighted. But I think what my takeaway from your presentation is the importance of really targeting your audience, making sure that the translation of the information and that process is actually leading up to something that can become a useful tool for citizens, and something that can move them towards action. I see we have a lot of sharing in the chat box. People are sharing about podcasts, interactive infographics. We have e-learning materials available online, interactive portals, so many digital tools that we can leverage on. So thank you all for sharing great strategies and how you carry out your communication process, and your advocacy efforts, and how communication plays a cross-cutting role in that. We're definitely benchmarking. So thank you for sharing, and keep it going in the very active chat box that we have. Now, we have talked about the challenges. We have moved on to country level experiences from government perspectives and from civil society perspectives when it comes to implementing effective communication strategies. The open contracting partnership is actually a great example of an international development organization that really puts premium on the value of developing and implementing effective and measurable communication strategies in advancing the open contracting advocacy. I see our representative, our speaker, very actively engaging in the chat box already, and it's very evident their emphasis on communications in the way they provide technical assistance in the projects that they support and implement, such as the open contracting lift, and their consistent development and publication of impact, progress, and use stories, among other engaging communication products that they have also been sharing in the chat box. You can very well access them on their website as well. So that's why I'm very pleased that they have accepted our invitation to join our session today. So without further ado, let me introduce to you our last speaker. So to share with us more about OCP's practices, challenges, and successful experiences in implementing their own campaigns that deliver impactful results, I'm very pleased to introduce George Newman, Head of Communications of the Open Contracting Partnership. To you, George.
Thank you, Marianne, and it's a really exciting session. I think the chat has been very communicative, so I'm glad about that. I'll share with you a little bit about what we've been doing in terms of strategic communications, trying to pick out a couple of examples for some of the tactics that we've been using, but also some of the lessons that we're seeing in like our overall approach to communications as a as an important element of how Open Contracting Partnership works and engages with both the community and outside. One of the key things that I think we think is important is to illustrate the amount of money that we're talking about. So one of the numbers that or visuals that we came up with is like, public procurement is a $13 trillion market. It's a huge number. So if you translate this into a bill of dollars stacked on top of each other, it would go to the moon, back to the earth, and back up away and back up again. So I think it's just a way of like showing how much money we're talking about. And, it's not a perfect example. And I think for a lot of others will come up with something better, but, giving something very concrete and tangible to the numbers that we're talking about will make those numbers stick more importantly. So I think was kind of one of our first lessons of like thinking about like, what are we talking about here? A lot of money, yes, but how much and what does it mean? And, you can translate into how many schools, how many hospitals, etc. Obviously, procurement has been in the spotlight throughout COVID last year, and I think we've picked up on that, and I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. And just to quickly say is like, we as an organization, we help partners think different about procurement, using open government approaches and an open data approach to drive inclusive, impactful, and sustainable reforms, really thinking about a circle of engagement and thinking about the community of what we're doing is for those who don't know the Open Contracting Partnership, we really place a strong focus on our community. And as part of that, in the beginning, our mission when we thought about this is really kind of, soon there will be two kinds of governments. Those who use outdated, paper-based and slow procurement processes, and those who use open contracting. In a way that was our mission in saying like, well, there is a better way of doing this. There's a better way of doing reform. There's a better way of applying openness to your processes in different ways. And understanding that there will be a implementation and innovation curve that goes from early adopters, and many of those early adopters and really smart people who understand open contracting and the benefits of transparency are in this, collectively here at GIFT, and we've worked with many of you. But now then doing that jump to the early majority and that most of the people are doing this, that's a really hard work that we're doing, and we're continuously working on that. And I'll have a couple of ideas on that. But before we started communicating, it was really about defining our voice. In many ways, in the beginning, we said, procurement is really kind of boring and technical. How can we make it fun? So we decided to tie our voice to OCP as an organization that is aligned to our values. So we wanted to be bold. We wanted to say like, well, to change procurement, it's not easy, it's hard work. So we have to propose bold proposals. But also, and I think that's one of the things that really defines our work, is to be open and engaging. We were very open about sharing our strategy processes with the community. We try to bring in the different actors, both civil society and government, into that conversation as much as possible and reflect back on what we learned. So that's a big part of our communication strategy. And, you know, GIFT does that in many ways as well. We try to be inclusive, and I think that is something that is growing over time, understanding that we need to be very conscious about how we show impact of procurement. And I think one of the things that we've always tried to do is, not talking as a US-based organization to African reformers or to Latin American reformers, but actually accepting that the best examples are coming from Paraguay, are coming from Ukraine, are coming from Nigerian civil society implementing open data portals. And I think that's something that is really, really important to highlight. And in the end, we knew that if people think it's boring, let's make it fun. So I think it's in a way something that we try to implement in our communications, where we try to be technical without sounding technical. So there's different ways of going to the moon, and we try to make that process more easy. I think one of the best examples for that is our Idiot's Guide, because it is one of our most downloaded publications. And it was very critical at the beginning to say, like, can we say Idiot's Guide? Do we talk about, is that difficult or not? But people are, and even governments are actually appreciative of the content. They look at it, they smile, and then they take it as it is, as a good way of representing it. The problems of procurement. So, it's not every time that we do this, and we try to do something as fun as this one, but it's still one of my favorite ones. And it works. And it doesn't work for every organization. I think that's also important to understand is, the world, you can, if you're at, for example, the World Bank, or if you are a government ministry, you have to be thinking, where is the end where you go? There's a very famous Twitter account from New Jersey who has like a really fun way of talking about talking up New Jersey as one of the smallest states in the US. And they have a great Twitter account, and they're running this game, and they're very authentic about doing this. But it needs to fit with your organization. So I'm not saying everyone should make fun things, but understand about like, where are your borders, what you can do, and how you can experiment with this. I think the second important part is that communications is not just a way of implementing. It's a core part of our strategy. It's a way of like how we implement things. So it's really baked in and supports all our programming in making advocacy and open contracting a global norm. So it's linked to this 4-point framework of showing why public contracts matter and generate that buy-in. The stories that we do about showing positive impact of open contracting on people's lives, but also, and that's something that is increasing now, where there are some moments where we can actually track that progress. There's a big part of our communications that is about being valuable to our community and providing access and resources and guidance for the community. And in the end, there's a big component about the credible and bold organization leading the charge. But at the core of it is that, powering and empowering our community that we try to do. So some tactical highlights, and I know I have very little time to go through all of this, is, I want to talk about micro-targeting of contact, just understanding the community, and data-driven storytelling. So I think one of the things that has come up before is understanding like, OCP in the world of civil servants and civil society is just a tiny part. There are so many other priorities, topics, financial constraints, and everything that everyone is having, that we have to be very much aware of that. So we need to go where they are by industry events. So rather, Open Government Partnership Summit is great to celebrate our community and bring people who work on this together, but it's even more important probably to go to the procurement conferences. They're boring, but they're even more important, because that's where they look for peers. Content placement. Our website is great, and we get that many visitors to our website, but thinking about what are the other places that where that'd be other podcasts, for example, where people would like to hear about us. That's important. That's a lot of media work, but it's also thinking about organizations. For example, when you talk about education, the UNESCO is working on education. So what are the ways that we can engage with the UNESCO in a good way? And there's a lot about direct messaging with key influencers and talking to them and trying to find out what matters, what works, and what they think about. So I think it's really this kind of approach in our circle of engagement, right? And we have kind of a circle of engagement when we say like sort of those are the core contexts in the middle, and then we go out as our time allows in a way, right? And this is a fairly old circle of engagement, so it's slightly out of date, but that's at the beginning where we said like, well, we're not focusing academia. We now know, we need to do that more, given that we have more evidence that we can work with academia on. So, in our more recent circle, and that was my timer of 10 minutes. I'm sorry about that. If you give me 2 minutes, I'll go through it quickly.
Sure, please.
We can do more of that. Second, I think one of the important parts of our COVID-19 response was to identify quickly kind of an opinion piece that anchored our conversation and what we thought about it. To think about like a strategy piece building on community input. So we reached out to community, and the blog post that was and the content that was most viewed last year was this post from the beginning, 5 procurement strategies. And that is basically coming from a community call, putting this together quickly in a message and sharing it back to the community. And it has stood up the time because our community is really smart. In that sense also, perfect was the enemy of the good. If you would have worked on that for 2 months and tried to turn it into a case study or a report, it wouldn't have worked. So working with blogs and working with this kind of content can be really helpful. And then improving the guidance over time by adding a newsletter, by adding more webinars, data guidance, country experience and research, sort of like coming and supporting that. And we had those were the people that understood this, from Ecuador. When you don't know what to do, you must do the right thing. Sort of like understanding that open contracting is the right thing was a good message to have. Through our peers who were saying this and not just us saying this. Quickly on impact stories, I think most of you have seen them. I think the key part that I think for us was very important is that we have a very high standard on those impact stories of understanding that, well, we really look at the data and some of them are impact stories and we try and find that. And some of them are progress stories or just data use stories and making that difference in there. And in the school meets in Bogota was sort of like one of that kind of brought all of this together because it showed the human impact, but it also showed like a concrete application of public procurement reforms in a specific secretariat. It doesn't talk about the whole education sector in Colombia, but that specific one really helped. 2 quick slides more one on measuring success, because it was mentioned before. Obviously, we're doing the traditional, website and social media analytics, media monitoring. One of the key things we did, especially early on, was share of voice. And it's understanding how much is open contracting as an issue being mentioned in conversations, not about public procurement in general, but public procurement reforms related to open government and open data. So when data and procurement was mentioned, we were tracking it and we were looking, do they talk about open data? Do they talk about open contracting or not? It was very time intensive, but it was a very helpful way of understanding who's talking about our issue, procurement issue, and how much of them are aware of open contracting and open data. And I think the other thing that is really important, and we looked at that in blogs, on Twitter, through sort of like search terms and on key media that we identified that we wanted to track. And then define what success looks like realistically. Will the New York Times in a year writes maybe twice about procurement? Just doing a search. I mean, they talk about procurement scandals, but they don't do a procurement think piece. They've done more over the last year because of COVID, yes. But before that, I was tracking 0 stories about procurement. Just understanding that is really helpful for understanding that. Financial Times, a bit more. So they have someone who knows about procurement. They talk about 4 or 5 stories a year, but that's exactly the amount. So like trying to building up that relationship is important, that when they write, you want to be in there. It's a lot about education and understanding how often journalists really write about our issues and, and then defining your success. And some lessons and insights. I think prioritization is very, very important. It's also much easier said than done. And it's an ongoing struggle. I struggle with it all the time. But still, it's a good reminder of less is more and doing it right. And the moment is not always right. In May, we thought ahead of the Angas and corruption with like everything that had happened in COVID and G7 meetings, emergency contracts and vaccine procurement could be a good issue, and we could get some media coverage on it, but we didn't, because vaccine equality, and rightly so, and the global tax proposals were much more important, and those were the issues that were covered, if anything, especially around the G7, and nothing about procurement. And that's that is fine as well, even though we did set our hopes up there a little bit. Hold your stats to high standards. And I think the big challenge that we are looking at now, or the efforts that we're trying to do, is going from that list of early adopters of open contracting, which are 30 countries plus, to an early majority. So that really, in Latin America, interestingly, we are at a stage where most of the Latin American countries are doing something on open contracting, but that's the only region, maybe Eastern Europe a little bit, but there's still, in Europe, a lot of work to do. So trying to get into this early majority, making it part of their day-to-day works, that's kind of the big next step of our strategy, where we're looking at. And just a shout out to all of the GIFT community, communications people. I think it's crazy to reform to reform the government. So here's to the crazy ones, and the ones who think differently. They're not fond of rules and no respect for the status quo. I think that's some good work that we have to do, and I'm glad to be sharing this with you.
Thank you so much, George Newman of OCP. I think what George has shared with us really goes to the heart of our objectives of today's session. It's great communication planning. It's great targeting. What he said, micro targeting even, and that leads to impactful results. What I think also George highlighted very well is measuring measuring the success of our communication efforts. This question has been being raised in our chat box very actively. A lot of people are asking more questions about it. So I believe it's now time to go directly to our open session. So I know we just budgeted until 11:30, I think, Eastern time. But if it's okay with you to stay a little bit more for 5 to 10 minutes, that would be great. Just to answer a few questions from the chat box. George, I see a great question here from Zuki. Do you take a global lens to media monitoring? How do you determine it, where to focus, and who?
Yeah, thanks, Duke. And I think, and also thanks for your comment on our resources. So that's what we're hoping for, and I'm glad it's working. We do take it, we do track media mentions and monitoring globally, but we don't engage with media at the national level, because we have as an organization approach where we try to empower local partners. So we wouldn't, pitch an op-ed to South African media without contacting you and coordinating and seeing, does it make sense to come from OCP, or does it rather make sense to come from someone else in the country, right? What we do see, though, is when we do media monitoring is where we have active partners, both government and civil society, there are more mentions of open contracting in the national media. So, Mexico tends to be very active. Conversation around open contracting. We've seen increase in Ecuador over the last year with a lot of the people there working on it. We're seeing this in South Africa, and you guys are doing a great job. So that's something that we track and we monitor to see if there's opportunities to step in and support and help as well, and what we can pull up to the international level as well, to more sort of like regional newspapers or regional media areas.
Thank you, George. And diving deeper into monitoring metrics, communication metrics. For our other speakers, Fabricio, Yusek, Chris, Lorena, you can give us your thoughts on this. What do you think, and what are the most useful and effective metrics to look at on your end when you evaluate the success of your communication campaigns?
Well, for us, I think is interaction in social media. I think that is one of the best metrics we can use about the comments, the likes, and the reshare of the information.
For you,
Yeah, I mean, for us, there's an element there about obviously number of clicks and so on, of people who download the research or people who engage with our research. That's the more quantitative aspect. But because most of our research is engaging people in the field and working with them, for us, it's more about the uptake of such research by stakeholders. So, for instance, we might end up not doing or discovering that something is not very useful, but at least the people that participated with us in such research projects also learn about it and can communicate to other practitioners the results of such research and such knowledge that is created as well with them. So for us, it's more, if you want, a qualitative measure as well, about the kind of uptake we want. For dissemination purposes, obviously, number of clicks, number of tweets, number of prints, and so on, but also understanding the limits that these platforms put on us, and the limits in terms of number of views doesn't necessarily mean success in some cases. So it's a matter of, as my previous colleague mentioned, Lorena, about also engagement, right? What are they asking? And in the case of a field, it's more about the questions you get. I assume in the case of government or civil society, it's also about the, what kind of either controversies or free and frank questions they get as well. Because if they are getting something of that, it means people are caring about it, right?
Thank you, Fabrizio. Isa, Chris, please go ahead.
Yes, for us in the Philippines, we have two platforms. Like I mentioned during my discussion, we have our online platform and we have our in-person platform. For our online platform, we actually use feedback surveys like Google surveys and SurveyMonkey whenever we have our webinars. And it's been very helpful for us to find out whether or not they appreciate the information that we communicated to them. Despite the pandemic, like I mentioned earlier, Marianne, we also conducted in-person roadshows, and we also had paper-based feedback forms for our participants to write their comments, and we found them very good because we learn from their comments and we improve in the next roadshow. Nationally, we also teamed up with our National Statistics Authority, well, it's the Philippine Statistics Authority, and we included our communication activities as part of the national survey. It's called FLEMS, Functional Literacy, Education, and Mass Media Survey. So those are the metrics that we used in the Philippines to measure our communicating strategies. Thank you.
Yusek, Chris, and Lorena, and I think Elda and George, I think just a final question. Do you have any recommendations to our participants here today, whether they want to start a new communication campaign or they want to strengthen what they already have? Where do they start? How do they get things going? How do they engage more their stakeholders? I think we can start with George, and then Fabrizio, Lorena, and then Yusek, Chris.
I think if there's sort of like one recommendation is keeping in mind this micro-targeting approach. I mean, the micro-targeting in of itself really comes from political campaigning and thinks about like all of the private data that some of the big campaigns think about sort of like of people. So in that sense, it's more about, I'm using it more in a social organization sense of like being aware of the other different kinds of places they are and the other needs they have, and adding value to that and thinking really about this. And I think, you know, as Fabrizio was saying, sometimes it's more important to get that one person read a one-pager than creating a huge campaign around something, and and that is, you know, maybe the misdirected. So I think really thinking about like, how do you get to those people that actually make a change and get their attention and read through your things can be more important than sort of like a perfectly executed big social media campaign, for example.
Thank you. Fabrizio, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so at my end, I mean, sure, like take advantage of all the digital media we have available, but depending on where you are, some offline engagement might be also useful. I mean, like in Latin America, we operate in very different contexts. I mean, we don't do much offline engagement. I mean, not in these days, but occasionally just, you know, knocking up a door, or, you know, just going to talk to someone about this is a good way of disseminating your product. On a more specific note, I think that the other element is about getting to know who is your audience initially, and trying to also target new audiences or new potential audiences. So for instance, all this procurement data and all these budget and spending data has great potential for people doing data science. I mean, no matter what essentially they study, because there's a bunch of data and they just love to do stuff with that. And so for the students, it's also an audience, and it's a way of engaging them with this kind of data. The same will go for the high school students and so on. So there's a link there as well that we often don't think about. And it's about exploring new audiences while keeping in mind what you want to achieve with your initial product, right? So we know the barometer now is being used, the open data barometer is being used by people publishing articles, criticizing the findings, and so on. That's secondary use, and that's great. I mean, like, it's amazing. I mean, it means that it's to some degree something useful. So that's something, and it's an audience that is essentially a byproduct of this particular publication. So yeah, that would be my recommendation.
Thank you, Lorena. Yeah.
I think the same that Rock and Fabrizio. I think starting with these micro-targeting communities, we already know it's a frequent consumer, but also from experience, the budget literacy is another way of dissemination and get to new audience, new publics, students, academics, that maybe they don't know the information is there, and that can trigger the use of the information of the downloads, they visit to the web. So I think budget literacy can be the most important engagement with the public.
Is it Chris?
Yes, for us in the Philippines, Marian, we have a digital divide very similar to other countries as well. And that's why it's very important to change our communication strategies depending on our audience. We have a large number of Filipinos who do not have access to the internet, who do not know how to use the computer. And that's the reason why, despite the pandemic, we've still pushed through with our physical and in-person roadshows. In terms of professionals, we've also tried to adjust our communication initiatives when we're talking to data scientists. Very similar to Fabrizio, we also adjust the way we talk. When we discuss with lawyers, especially our national elections are coming up, we have a different angle. And of course, just like the other speakers, when we're talking to high school students or university students, we also talk to them differently. So we adjust to our audience.
Thank you very much to all our speakers. Now, we apologize for questions that we have not been able to accommodate for lack of time, as active as this session has been. So I believe it calls for a second part or a sequel. What do you think about that? But for now, as it is also very late in the Philippines, and I'm sure you all have very busy schedule. We have a next session coming up. We wouldn't keep you for very long now. I'd like to thank again all of our speakers, very active discussions, all of our participants who were very actively sharing in the Zoom chat box. And again, back to our speakers, Fabrizio, Yusek, Chris, Lorena, George. It's been great having you all. I believe it's been a very productive session. I've learned a lot, and I believe we achieved our objective of diving deeper into the challenges and solutions in implementing effective communication and dissemination strategies. Now, just one last final poll, but I will not launch it anymore. Just to decide on an action point forward, just type it in your Zoom chat box. Are you interested in participating in more peer learning and network activities around this work stream? Effective communications, effective dissemination strategies. So if you are interested, please do type yes in the chat box, and then we'll consider that moving forward as a part of our action items. I believe with the way the session has been dynamic today, we're definitely going to have more sessions, and I see requests for emailing materials that have been shared. We'll definitely consolidate that. Thank you. So please expect us to also invite you in more sessions around this theme. Surely we'll see each other in similar events. So until then, thank you again for participating in our session. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.